Hello there, and welcome back to Inside the Vault, episode number 47. I'm your host, Ryan Smith, and making his third appearance on the podcast is Two Growls One Roar as we preview the Panthers Raiders game out in Las Vegas. How's it going, buddy?
Hey man, thanks Ryan. It's been a busy week for both of us, so I thank you for making the time late in the day
Yeah,
for me.
yes. Let's get right into it. I know you talked about it on your podcast and my other podcast, Win the Division. I talked about this as well, but just your initial thoughts and reactions on Bryce Young getting benched for Andy Dalton this week, getting the start against the Raiders, and just your long term. Do you think Bryce Young is going to play for the Panthers again?
It's a very wild week. It's funny. You go from Sunday, and I don't know how many fans were upset, but I personally was like, man, this is just bad. Week one to week two. And I'm
Yeah.
in there I'm calling for Andy to get in the game and get some reps. And then Dave Canales really does it. I was a little shocked. I mean, probably not as shocked as Bryce, but to go from he's our guy and then pulling the plug on him on Monday,
Yeah.
it's a tough time right now in Carolina, man, because whether you like him or not, I feel like we're just the franchise itself is so far behind, man. So for
Yeah.
me, I don't know, man. It's hard to know to picture if he's going to play or not. I know there's a lot of folks that are hopeful, but I also wouldn't be surprised if, weeks from now or next year, he's traded away somewhere and kind of goes his own way.
Well, I'm of the belief that he's not going to be traded away, and I say this only because I've heard Steve Smith talk in some radio hits. I heard Jake Delhomme do his as well.
Mm-hmm.
There was an article, I believe it was Charles Robinson of Yahoo Sports. I don't know if you saw that one, but he specifically said he talked to someone in the building that has pretty good understanding of what's kind of going on, and they said this is more like a breather and get right for Bryce Young, and then take a mental break, not the end of
Mm-hmm.
his career in Carolina. And he says he definitely believes him, the source, but he also says not 100% only because of how unpredictable David Tepper is. And so that was his kind of
Right.
that was he thinks there's a good chance Bryce sticks around, but he thinks because of David Tepper's unpredictability, you just never know what happens. So,
Yep.
yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll see what happens. Obviously, this week though is Andy Dalton's time against the Raiders, which he is 4-0 against. Last time the Panthers played, Andy Dalton was week 3 in Seattle last year, which he had a pretty good game, obviously. And
Good.
even though they still lost, it was still a good output. So, right before we get into the preview, though, what did you feel like was wrong with Bryce Young specifically? Did you feel like he definitely deserved getting benched? Because there were some fans who still didn't think he needed to get benched. I'm of the belief that I think it was twofold. I think it's kind of asinine to bench him at this point because we're only two
Mm-hmm.
games in, but at the same time, you couldn't really evaluate the team based on how he was playing. So, it was kind of a twofold, situation.
I agree with you. I think it was one of those where some fans are like, well, this is 18 games that we've seen Bryce. But then others are like, well, yeah, that's great. But we've only seen Dave Canales with him for 2 games. And
Right.
Dave Canales has talked so highly of him since this whole thing started. He's been really high on Bryce Young all the way up through camp, preseason. I personally think like what if he had just gotten more reps in the preseason? Like, and I'm not saying it would have fixed everything, but what if the kinks and issues he's having now resolved then, or at least he would have been a little bit further along? I'm with you. It's weird. Like I said, I know I kind of wanted this to happen because he was just bad out there. But at the same time, you're like, okay, well, this is supposed to be Canales and his offense, and he's supposed to be the quarterback whisperer, which people say, why can't he get it right with Bryce? And it's just another head scratching moment in Panthers history, and
Yeah.
I think we're all used to.
We are. Yeah. Well, and it's funny because they said the offensive line wasn't healthy for some of the preseason, and that's why he
Mm-hmm.
didn't play supposedly in at least one of those preseason games, probably more the second one, not the
Yep.
first one. And then he goes out there against backups for the Bills, plays 8 plays, one drive, and then that's it. I've seen enough. Pull him.
Get out
Uh,
of there.
and and part of me, I think, believes Dave when he says he had an epiphany, and so here's my theory. Actually, not this is not my theory, but talking with one of the guys who is helps put on my podcast, he was saying, with a couple of other guys on the Believe in Panthers podcast, he was saying his theory was, well, what if Dave saw this all in training camp and even into the preseason practices and joint practice with the Jets, and he said, let's go to Tepper. Let's tell him why we think we should start Andy to start the season based on some things he saw. He goes to Tepper, and Tepper says, well, let's start Bryce for at least a few games. Let's see how he does. Maybe he'll surprise us. And if he still looks bad, sure, then we can bench him. And so then games 1 and 2 happen. And then he obviously goes back to Tepper. It's like, see what I was saying? I think we need to bench him. And then Tepper, agrees because he's been made and notified ahead of time. And so he's kind of got that heads up. So it's just a theory that he was running by me. But, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things you just – in hindsight being 2020, I personally think we should have played Dalton last year and not put Bryce to the Wolves, kind of like you see with Michael Penix in Atlanta, Drake May in New England, some of these guys this year.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, I think what's happening with Bryce is it's really two things. Number one, his confidence is not very good. It's pretty shot after getting sacked 62 plus times last year. And number two is he's literally looking down at the rush and he's not trying to throw the ball downfield because he's so afraid of getting hit. And so that's really that's really all it is. And the guys who followed him in Alabama, I think I saw somewhere they're like, yeah, I watched every Bryce Young game at Alabama and I don't recognize this Bryce. This is not Bryce at Alabama. So I don't know. If Andy Dalton comes out and slings it all over the field and Panthers pick up a victory, and Andy Dalton looks pretty good, that'll be telling. If he goes out and stinks it up, that'll be telling too. So
yes, it will.
I think it's gonna be somewhere in the middle. Honestly, I think is what's gonna happen. So
I'm with you.
Let's get into it though. Panthers Raiders, switching gears now to the red bearded Andy Dalton with a little gray in there now. Going into age 36 is Andy Dalton, and second year with the Panthers, and he's 4-0 against the Raiders all time. Had some success against them. What are you looking for specifically on offense first with Andy Dalton and the company to do against Las Vegas on Sunday?
Do you think, like you kind of alluded to there, some shots downfield? And I think as a veteran, he's going to have the ability to do that. Size difference, and man, I've been going back and watching a lot of Bryce, and when you talk about Bryce not being Bryce, the tiptoes, the jump passes, those moments, man, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is bad, and I don't know why it's happening, but I look for that, and hopefully it's not really Andy per se, but for them to finally rely on the run game, which would kind of be, they've been down a lot, but the passing game hasn't been great, and they're not taking shots downfield. So I think for this game, I'd love to see Andy step up in the pocket, take a hit, get the ball out. And I'm with you. I'm kind of in the middle ground for what I expect out of Andy this week. A win would be nice, though.
I think all Panther fans could use the win. I think what I don't understand before switching to the defense side of the ball, what I don't understand is, since we're talking about Dalton and the offense, you hear really two sides of Panther fans. One says, well, what's the upside with Andy Dalton if you're going to win 5-6 games at most with him? You're not going to get the number one pick or top two. And then on the other side, you just stick with Bryce and you close to the number one pick and keep building up this roster. Like, what's the point of winning 5 to 6 games anyway? And I see what they're saying, but at the same time, I'm like, well, Panther fans, I think, just want to win.
We need to win. Yes.
We need to win. In September, you can't Canales and the other 52 people on the roster, he's looking out for them. His job was brought in to win games. You can't throw away a season just because, you made a quarterback switch. And I just think at the end of the day, wherever the Panthers finish, we're going to have our first round pick, Lord willing, this year. And so we're going to have and able to make some improvements no matter where we finish. But you can't
Yep.
just throw away a season, even though you had a quarterback change.
I
So
agree with you. Yep. And yeah, I think even when winning 5 or 6, we would still, to your point, probably be top 5, top 10. And I don't even know if we were in top 5 or close to one that I want us taking a quarterback right now. Like, I just, with the way things have gone, like, can we just start to build out the team a little bit better around whoever the next quarterback's going to be? So I'm with you.
yeah, well, not to get into the draft talk, but Travis Hunter came out today and said he's playing corner and wide receiver in the NFL. He's going to play both ways,
Wow.
and that is attractive if you are a Panther fan.
Yes.
Corner and receiver, a guy like Travis Hunter. But anyway, we can talk about that in the offseason. So on the defensive side of the ball now, then switching gears for the Raiders. Obviously you've got Max Crosby on coming after our offense, but on against the Raiders defense, who is last against the run, not doing very good in that range. What do you want to see with the Panthers defense specifically getting after Gardner Minshew and company on that side of the ball?
Yeah, Gardner Minshew leading in completion percentage and completed passes. He's been threading that thing, man. And to your point, they knocked off the Ravens this past week, who's I know they're 0-2 now, but
Back from behind,
pretty
yes.
yeah, pretty decent football team. At least they have been. So I think for me, it is going to be containing Max Crosby. I don't know how you do it with what we have. I think the offensive line has been holding up pretty well the
Yeah.
first 2 weeks. Now, I do think it's still trying to get the run game established with Chuba Hubbard. I'm not expecting a lot out of it. And same thing with Miles Sanders, like feeding in behind him. But I think if you can do that, I'd love to see more of Xavier Legette. Like we just haven't seen a ton of him and really a ton of any receivers or Johnson, to be honest. So some passing aim, can we get to 200 passing yards? Maybe close to 100 total rushing yards as a team. That would be probably a nice start for me.
Yeah, an underrated matchup in this game is Max Crosby versus Taylor Moton, who actually know each
Mm-hmm.
other, both playing at Max schools. Taylor Moton played at Western Michigan, and then Max Crosby at Eastern Michigan. So they've gone
Nice.
against each other a lot of different times in college. I believe they said they've gone like 3 or 4 times in college, and then
Wow.
twice in the NFL. So they know each other pretty well going back to their college days. So I
That's a
think
good fact.
that'll be a good matchup there.
Yep.
Did you notice Johnny Hecker's punts, at least in the Chargers game? He had a few shanks there. I know he's dealing with
He
a back
did.
injury, so I'll give the guy a little bit of credit or benefit of the doubt. But I think I need to see a little bit more from Johnny Hecker, too, in this game if
Mm-hmm.
we have to punt.
Yep.
He didn't. He shanked a few in the Charger game.
He did. I will say, man, special teams, like outside of Eddie Pinheiro, has just been bad. Like we talk a lot about offense and Bryce, talk a lot about the defense in general. Special teams coverage, and it's happened all through the preseason, now into the regular season. Coverage has been bad. And to your point, though, some of them are just not good punts by Hecker. So yeah, that you gotta connect on all three phases or at least be up to par if you want to try to go out and here pull out a win this week, I think.
Yeah, complementary football in all three phases, as they say, is the best
Mm-hmm.
recipe for success. So let's get a little bit more now deeper into this game before I'll get your prediction from you as well. When it comes to what you want to see, obviously, I want to see a close game as a Panthers fan, win or lose. I want to see a close game, obviously. But is there any particular player on both sides of the ball you're kind of looking forward to seeing maybe try to take advantage of some matchups? I think for me, Xavier Legette would be mine on the offensive side of the ball, trying
Mm-hmm.
to get one-on-ones down the field. He mentioned, I think earlier this week, he's like, just put it up on some go routes and I'll catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And that country twang of his. And then on defense with the loss of Eric Brown, which is still just unbelievable. Last year was
Yep.
Shaq Thompson week 2, and this year was Tarek Brown week 1 is J.C. Horn for me. He had the pick against
Mm-hmm.
Herbert last week. He allowed the touchdown against Quentin Johnson, bounced back nicely with that pick. And so I'm looking for J.C. to shut down Devontae Adams. That is popcorn viewing right there between Devontae Adams and J.C. Horn. Let's shut him down. Let's force them to run the ball. Let's force Minshew to go elsewhere and see if we can get some limits at their point totals on the board.
I like it. I like Xavier. I think that's a good one. I'll probably fall. I mean, Andy Dalton for me, just because it's a veteran what can Andy Dalton do with this offense and a guy who's played one game over the last year? I mean, we're actually going back to week 3 of last year when he played. It's been almost a year right at it. So is he rusty? Is he still got it? Like that's one big question mark for me. And I maybe throw in a Jonathan Mingo who had the 2 fumbles in the first game. I know the one he ended up being out of bounds. But
Yeah.
Mingo comes in hot and everyone's hyping him up. He's kind of sizzled out. Defensive side of the ball, really, I think I like Horn in the matchup there. For me, I think Josie Jewell stepping up a little bit more. I'm not going to say I
Some people
haven't been
calling for Trevor
impressed.
Wallace. Yeah, some people are calling for Trevor Wallace to get back in there and
Yes.
replace him.
Yes, I would be all for Trevor. Like I have not been super impressed with, and a lot of people maybe teetered on like, oh, Jewel's gonna kind of give us a little bit of what Frankie did, and I'm like, I don't think so. Like not to this point. Like
Half of what he did, maybe half,
right,
but
exactly.
no, yeah, that's a good one. I would like to see Trevor Wallace. That would be a good one. He's someone who can come in, I think, and provide a spark at that linebacker position. Shaq Thompson's still flying around like he normally does. Shy
Yes.
Tuttle will also be out on defense this week as well, though he's been, in my opinion, a little bit of a liability, so not much
Yep.
loss there. All right, well, let's get your prediction before we do some miscellaneous stuff, and I'll get you out of here. What's your prediction for the game on Sunday in Las Vegas in the Sin City? Panthers Raiders 4:05 kick.
So I think the line's down to like 5.5.
Yep.
I want to pick. I really want to pick the Panthers. I've gone. I picked them week 1, and I was like, I'm back in the mode of I can't
Going
pick them
back.
to win. Yeah, I can't do it. So I I don't know, man. I think the defense still has just been terrible. I think it could be closer this week. Uh, I'm still going to lean. I just don't know enough. I'm going to say Raiders 24, Panthers 17 for my final.
Okay. I'm going to go 3-20 Carolina. And I only
Like
say
it.
because, and I've said this on my other podcast, I was actually in New Orleans for the week 1 game.
Oh, nice.
And I was in Bank of America Stadium for week 2. So I will not be in Vegas this week. I am 0-2.
You're the good luck.
I'm 0-2 seeing the Panthers live this year. So I will not be in Vegas this weekend. I'm here at my house. So I think that might be the difference. They're going to get
there you go.
No, without Ryan Smith attending the game. So,
oh man, love it.
No, yes, that being in New Orleans was nice with the food, but the game itself was not good. The fans were around me though were very nice. They were like, well, we didn't expect this either. We didn't expect to score 40 points, so
right.
And of course, the Saints waxed the Cowboys week 2, and we obviously see how they're doing pretty well.
Good.
Let's talk in general, just kind of long term, going back to Bryce here. What do you think is the number one thing if he does get a chance to come back this season, which again, I do think is going to happen? I'm targeting, this is a bold prediction by me here. And you're the first person that I'll be telling this to in the world here. And our listeners will hear this. I'm predicting after the bye, so that's after the Germany game. Whatever the bye is, I think it's week 11, week 12, something along those lines. That is my prediction of when Bryce will come back. Now, that obviously can be screwed up if Andy Dalton gets hurt, but I think that's what's going to end up happening. Do you think we'll see Bryce this season again, or do you feel like Andy Dalton will just be playing quarterback as long as we're winning, or at least being competent in games?
Yeah, I think if Andy wins, I think it's going to be hard. But to the flip side, I think this whole thing, Canales having to navigate this in his first year, I mean, it's going to be a storm either way, because I feel like if Andy does really well, then you're questioning Bryce in his future, or maybe you're saying, hey, this is great for him to sit. At the same time, if Andy starts to just play bad or he's nowhere near as good as Bryce, then you get to see Bryce a little bit earlier. But then as a head coach, you look like, why did you make this decision and pull the plug so early? Yeah, I don't know if there's a good outcome, but I like your point of like around the bye. I mean, if he is to make a return this season,
correct,
I think that's probably a good point in time. Also, you probably could get into a space, which hopefully this is not it, where the Panthers are just outright bad with Andy, lose a lot of games, and then you're like, well, Andy's not the future. He's gone after the like. Let's just get Bryce in. Let's get our final evaluation of him over the last whatever X games. So I think that's a good indicator because that's like the second half of the season, pretty much.
Correct. Yeah. Well, and going back to Charles Robinson, who I mentioned earlier, Yahoo Sports writer, he said something interesting in the article he talked about was, they've approached Bryce and essentially told him, listen, like, this is a mental reset for you, but also, hey, Andy Dalton is signed through the end of this season. So he's a free agent at the end of this year. So it's like you're going to be temporarily on the bench. We're not giving up on you. It's actually the exact opposite. We're trying to save you from you. We're trying to give you a mental break, something you should have had last year, but you did not have. And here's a way you can learn, you can get better. And to be just straight blunt with it, I think this is the most adversity Bryce Young has dealt with in his life. I'm being dead serious. He number one quarterback at modern day high school, number one high school in the country, Alabama, where he did not win a national championship, but he did win a Heisman, and he was in the national championship. So it's like surrounded by five-star talent everywhere he's been. And then he goes to Carolina and not so much. And so that's at least a thought of it too, is how can he respond to this adversity? He either can put on his big boy pants, learn and get better, and take Andy's advice. And it sounds like they have a really good rapport, good relationship. Or he can kind of, continue to, just kind of be there, but not be present. And, his career might be in jeopardy. So that's at least how I see it from that standpoint.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, as I said at the top, my guest today here on this special edition of Inside the Vault, episode 47, shortened episode, Two Growls One Roar. Before we get out of here, buddy, is there anything else that you want to touch on before this game, whether it's or about Bryce Young's benching, anything that you wanted to get out here, our listeners, maybe in some insight that maybe I didn't go over, or anything that you might feel is a good addition for the fans here?
Nothing in particular. I will say if you are a true fan, which it's a tough time right now.
Yeah.
We can only hope that this thing is gonna get right one way or the other. And I know it's tough right now. So that I don't have any amazing words of encouragement, but we're right there in this thing with you watching this unfold.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be back with you for another episode next week. Again, Two Growls One Roar. Follow him on Twitter at Two Growls One Roar. Does great work. Go watch his stuff, and we'll talk to you down the road, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it.
And that'll wrap up episode number 47 of Inside the Vault. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and we'll see you next time.